Hello, welcome to Baha'i Focus. Baha'i Focus is a weekly production of the Carbondale Baha'i community. And it's one of the Baha'i principles. One of the Baha'i principles is the idea of cooperation between different religions. Today we have with us Rabbi Leonard Zoll of the Jewish community in Carbondale. Thank you for being on the show. I was wondering, just what is it you have to do to become a rabbi? What is your background?
My background? Well, I come from Brooklyn, New York, and when I got to college, I got involved with Hillel there at Brooklyn College, and I became interested in more intensive study of Judaism, and I studied sociology there, and I decided when I was 19 that I wanted to become a rabbi, and I finished at Brooklyn College, got a BA, and stayed on as a graduate fellow for a couple of years in sociology. I wanted to get some more training of that before I went to seminary, and then I graduated from seminary in 1965. It's a 5-year program after college, or whatever you've done after college in between seminary. So most of the students there are about 27, 28 hours, 29. And you have to spend 5 years. In my seminary, it's 5 years. Some are longer, some are shorter. These days the program's changed a little. The first year is in Israel, but in those days, 5 years in my case in New York, and you study, well, for 210 hours of credits, study Bible and rabbinic literature and Semitic linguistics and philosophy and history and homiletics and speech and educational principles and counseling and God knows what else. I think it was about 20 hours a week, something like that.
How long did it actually take you to get out of school?
Out of that school? 5 years.
To become a rabbi?
5 years, yeah. So what do you need to be able to do? You're able to endure it. You have to be able to do it.
How long have you been in Carbondale?
About 2 years.
2 years. I know for a long time there wasn't a rabbi here at all.
That's true.
What are your duties in Carbondale here?
Our duties are to conduct the affairs of Congregation Beth Jacob, the Beth Hillel. I also teach in the Religious Studies Department at SIU.
What do you teach?
I teach Judaism and Holocaust, separate courses. I teach a class in the Newman Loyola program on Jewish theology this year. Last year I taught Hebrew and the Book of Esther and Ruth and the Passover Haggadah. I go to Marion Prison, Chaplain Marion Prison, Menard's Prison, Anna Mental Health Center, the VA Hospital. I'm involved with the blood drive in the hospice.
Do you have any time to sleep?
I sleep when I'm at all these events, some people think. No, I sleep in between while I'm driving from place to place. And actually, as I get older, I need less sleep, so I sleep about 5 or 6 hours. I was told when I decided to become a rabbi, I needed to be able to do 2 things by the Hillel director, who's at Brooklyn College, who's now retired. He said, 1, you need to have a suitcase, and 2, you need a lot of stamina and not need much sleep. So that was about 30 years ago, and he was right.
You said that you're the head of the Hillel in town here. What exactly is that?
Hillel is now in its 62nd or 63rd year, I guess. It started in Urbana, and its concern is campus Jews. And this campus, I think, has had a Hillel about 25 years, and it's an international operation in, I think, about 13 countries, where we place Jewish advisors on campuses that request such a service to help the Jewish community function on campus. And what we do here, this is a limited operation here, unfortunately. We conduct services and study groups and some social events and participate in the campus community at large.
Would these be services separate from the temple?
Only occasionally, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we do it. Generally, we invite the kids to come or the faculty to come to the synagogue. This is a very small Jewish community, and there's too much duplication otherwise, and there aren't enough people to go around. So we have special events at the university, like Sabbath suppers. or Passover Seders and that type of thing, movies. Many of our activities are actually held in the campus student center.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Judaism. I think that's probably what most people would like to hear about.
Okay.
I think I mentioned earlier there's about 4,000 questions I'd like to ask you.
All right, well, we only have a half an hour. You can get them in fast. I come back
we
again.
can talk quick. Where does Judaism begin?
It begins in the Middle East, the ancient Middle East, or as it was called, the Near East.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it's moved from the near to the middle. I don't know, the middle of what.
Which country did it start in?
It didn't start in the country. It started in what's called the Fertile Crescent, which runs from what's called Syria today down to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that whole section, I don't know how many miles it is, but the whole section that runs over that part near the Mediterranean,
right,
and a little over, near the Jordan and all that. These were ancient Semitic peoples who were relatively similar, all pagans, which means they worship many gods. And apparently somewhere along the line, a guy showed up out of this whole thing. His name was Abram, or later Abraham, and he said, there's only one God. Now, some people say he's the first one to say it. He probably wasn't the first one to say it, but he's the first one who said it, and we remembered him saying it. So he had more impact than whoever else there might have been. So Abram and his wife Sarai wandered around with their relatives and their servants and their army, and so he's a rich guy, according to the version of the Bible. And he ran around the area, he wandered around, and visited different places, and everybody loved him, or they didn't love him, but they said they loved him, because he had a strong army.
Right.
And
it's something that most people don't realize, that Abraham had an army.
They were good. They were
in fact,
blue and white berets. They were tough 318 select troops, and they had parachutes and tanks and missiles, and they beat everybody up who got in their way, including the 5 armies who abducted his nephew Lot. And when they beat them up, they said...
Back off a second. You said he had parachutes and...
I'm kidding you.
Oh, okay. All right, okay.
I'm kidding around. They obviously were better trained and more motivated than the other armies, because when the other armies took away his... kidnapped his... look, it sounds like today. A Jew is abducted, right? And he went after them, like in Tebby. And he beat them, and they said, you want spoil? He said, I don't want any spoil. I just want my nephew and a little money to take care of my retainers. I don't want anything from you. Right. This is repeated over and over in the Bible, by the way, in the book of Esther, when they defended themselves against the Persians. They said, we didn't take any spoil. We just want to be left alone. And these are the characteristics of Abraham. He was a peaceful person. He didn't like to fight, but if he had to, he knew what to do. And this is one of the characteristics that has been forgotten and suppressed. Not only was he wealthy and apparently well-educated and an important guy in the Middle East, and had an army, but he didn't like to fight. But if he had to, he would. He believed in justice, and he was concerned with other people's surviving. For example, in Sodom and Gomorrah, when God said, oh, look, I'm going to wipe out these guys, Sodom and Gomorrah, they're evil. He said, what are you going to do? Then maybe there's someone nice there. So he is considered the forefather. Whether he was or he wasn't doesn't matter. We say he was because we liked him. And he had the characteristics that have impressed themselves on the basic structure of the Jewish people and of Judaism. Namely, the passion and concern for justice, which means sometimes you have to go chase your enemies around and get back your people, as well as a concern for peace. He wants to be peaceable. So he is, his name was Avram, the exalted father. And he was a great person. The more I study about him, I was studying about him for, 33, 34 years. So 33 years. The more I study about him, every year when we read the cycle of stories about him, and we teach about him, I think he is great. I mean, I see more and more things about him. But he's somewhat neglected now. We don't talk much about him. He was overshadowed by Moses later on, but we shouldn't forget about him. He is given the title of the father of all these multitudes, which includes we say, or not we say, but the Christians say and Muslims say he's their father too, and we say fine, right? So that's half the world says that he's their forefather. So that's pretty good. So that's the long answer to a short question, as most of my answers are. And we've been around 4,000 years. We have a lot of answers to give to short questions. So that's where we think it began. But it's spread out very quickly.
When approximately did he live?
We think around 4,000 years ago.
So let's see, Moses was
Around
3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, was there a book? Did he give a book?
No.
Does anybody know?
Didn't leave any documents, as far as we know. Most of these people didn't leave any documents. They simply left oral tradition. In those days, mostly everything was oral. It was set down later.
Right.
Which means there are different versions about him in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're contradictory, but pretty much we get a clear picture of him.
When would you say that the Bible was written?
Written down?
The Torah.
We think the Torah, the first 5 books of the Holy Scripture, were written down about 2,500 years ago.
So that would put it...
about 1,500 years after he lived, approximately. So in the 1,500 years, you
so
can
it would be 500 years after Moses. This would be the time of the captivity?
Either during or after, probably after, I suppose, when they came back to Palestine. They wrote it down. Ezra said, here's the Torah. And they didn't know the Torah. So he presented them with a book of the Torah. Maybe they lost it. So maybe it was never written down before. Who knows? So
there was a book then at the time of Ezra.
Yeah, sure. He lifted up the Torah according to the book of Ezra, and he read it to them, and he translated it. So there probably was something maybe a little before him, but we think around that time it was written down.
Possibly it was compiled too into its later form.
Well, I mean, in the form that we have it, we think it's therefore older, but the form that we have it, we think is around 2,500 years.
One thing I noticed also, I talked to a lot of people, is that, speaking of Abraham, that Abraham had 3 wives. Do you know much about that?
3 wives. Oh, yes, 3 wives, right. Well, the
Sarah,
first one...
and Keturah. Yeah,
first one, Sarah gave him one of her girls to bear a child because she couldn't have any. So that's Egyptian slave girl, Hagar. And she had Ishmael. And he was the chief child until little Isaac came about. And then Sarai said, you have to throw her out with her child because this boy is causing trouble.
Right.
Abraham didn't like that. He liked the boy. So he had to do what his wife said, because God sent a word to him that you're listening to your wife. Jewish husbands always listen to their wives because they know everything that's correct. Isn't that right? So he had to throw her out, which disturbed him, and it's a disturbing story. But for the purposes of the Torah and Jewish history, that had to be because the kid was Egyptian. And you can't have an Egyptian kid taking over the mantle of Abram. So Isaac took over. And then when Sarah died, he got himself another wife. He lived a long time. So he had a number of...
If I'm not mistaken, I think that the Islamic people traced their line to Abraham through Hagar.
Hagar.
Hagar,
right.
yes.
Okay, now there's something wrong about it because the Ishmaelites are Egyptians. And the Arabs are not Egyptians. So I don't care that the Egyptians under Nasser said they were the United Arab Republic. They are not Arabs. They are Egyptians. Okay. So there's some confusion there. How do the Arabs trace themselves to Hagar, who is an Egyptian, since they are not Egyptians? So I don't have to answer that. I'm raising the question. You know, let the Arabs and Muslims explain that. But that's the question. How do they do it? I mean, I'd be happy for them to do it, but I don't see the connection. Unless there's a spiritual connection. They wish to adopt him as their forefather, and that's fine. I don't have any monopoly on Abraham.
I never thought of that. I wonder if somehow he and his mother went, apparently they went southeast. And
who knows? But genetically, we'll say, I don't, not a geneticist, but she was in no way an Arab.
I was just wondering, is there a history of...
See, Abram was
an
Arab. Abram was an Arab.
He was.
What we think an Arab is a wanderer, a nomad. He was a nomad. He was a wanderer.
But you were saying this is a different racial stock? You're talking
No,
about?
they were all the same type of people. You see, Arab is the same in Hebrew. The same root for Arab, Arab, and Ivri is the same root. It's a type of group in the ancient Middle East, namely a wandering group, an unstable group that wanders from place to place.
Like
it means Aver.
Like a Bedouin.
A Bedouin, right.
Yeah.
Well, he was a Bedouin. He had tents and camels and donkeys and so on.
Was Abraham a Bedouin?
Sure. So, it's the same group that started out. Now, if the Arabs want to trace themselves that way and saying he was one, fine. But through Hagar is a bizarre selection. They could have picked somebody else.
Yeah. That's interesting. One of the stories that the Islamic people tell is that it was Ishmael that was sacrificed, or was going to be sacrificed instead of Isaac. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know where that story came from. It's clearly Isaac.
I think it's from the Quran.
Okay, well, I don't know. You can say whatever you like. The Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says it's Isaac. And that's what makes the story so horrible for Abram, because they finally got his own child through Sarah, and then he had to kill it, which he didn't ultimately do, but that was the storyline.
How much is known about the third wife? Do you know much about her at all?
No. She was nobody important. She didn't do anything.
She had several children.
Yeah, but she didn't know anybody. Who knows who they are? I mean, they're irrelevant. See, for example, Moses' children have disappeared. They were nobody.
What does that mean?
They were nobodies. What happened to them? Now, here, the great leader Moses had these two kids. His wife, Zipporah, Midianite girl, he married. She disappeared. Many children, many lines become insignificant in the Bible. They just disappear. Why some are dominant, remain, some are not, we don't know. Probably the result of either the attitudes of the people themselves, or the attitudes of the people about them. They didn't like their mother, or they didn't like them, or there was a power struggle and they lost. Groups disappear.
That brings up an interesting question about the line of succession after the prophet. Does it pretty much fall through the family? Or
What's that?
the line of succession after a prophet dies?
There's no line of succession for
Is there
prophets.
any...
Prophets don't have a line of succession. Only the kings have a line of succession, or the priests.
Don't they usually have someone who heads the community after they leave?
But there's no succession. If your God picks the prophet,
Right. Well, you
it
could
could
never
be anybody.
You could never pick
It's not.
anyone
It's
as a
not.
prophet.
It's not the hereditary line. As a matter of fact, some of the prophets say, I'm not a prophet, and I'm not the son of a prophet. So if there were hereditary prophets, if there were guilds and cults of prophets, they denounced that. They said, that's not the way it works. God picks individuals, and there's no line. Now, that could have been an opposition to the monarchy and the priesthood.
Was Joshua related to Moses?
Not that I know. He was just his assistant.
No, there was some controversy about whether, at the time of Jesus, whether there was a line of succession through his family.
Well, this is an
Since his
interesting
brother
question.
was, the
There's
head
an
of
interesting
the Church of
question
Jerusalem.
here. Just having discussed it just 2 days ago with a minister and a priest. This question of the genealogy of Jesus, which is very amorphous in the Testament. If Joseph is not his father, then why tell us his genealogy? And they pointed out that to me, these two friends, that it's incomplete anyway, so it doesn't matter. So why is it there? And there's another genealogy through Mary.
Probably an attempt to trace him back to David.
Yeah, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Even if it was complete, it doesn't work, because if Joseph is not his father, then what's the difference about that? And then they said there's another genealogy for Mary. That doesn't work because you have to take it through the father. You do the king's child, not the queen's child.
There was some speculation that Mary was a cousin of Joseph, but it doesn't really say that anything.
It doesn't matter. It does not apply to the mother. It only applies to the father. In terms of being a king, the Messiah was a king of Israel who had to be in the line of the kings. The mother didn't count. It was the father counted there. So in either event, it doesn't work. The New Testament writers give us wrong information about genealogies because it's irrelevant, which means that they didn't understand what they were telling us. They either were ignorant Jews or they weren't Jews at all. They didn't understand about the Messianic concept in Israel. They made up their own Messianic concept, which is all right, but it doesn't work. The texts don't apply. Now, your listeners are going to go crazy when they hear this. Check with your minister, your priest. I'm not making it up. He's telling you about it. These things in modern scholarship is very objective, whether it's Christian or Jewish, whether it's Catholic or Protestant or Greek Orthodox. All scholarship has to be objective. It doesn't matter who's doing it. And you have to deal with the texts that you have, and you have to be honest about them. And then you can make up any theology you want, but don't say these texts support it.
Okay. What is it that you were saying was going to drive people crazy about the genealogy?
What I just said.
Yeah, the genealogy.
Okay, I'm not picking on Jesus as one of my friends, but and a relative too. But these texts are bizarre, so don't count on them for establishing the messiahship of Jesus, because they don't do that. Which is what Jews at that time obviously understood. They didn't respond to the
something
claim.
that people, if they do object to what you just said, might want to do is
come over and discuss with me. I'll do that.
Well, you can take the genealogies, and I think it's Matthew and Luke, and write them down point by point, and write down the names of these people, and you'll find that
there are
not only
texts that do that.
do they not match, but the one is about 15 generations too long.
There are Christian scholars who have done that, and I mean, the two clergy that I was discussing both were aware of these discrepancies, and they didn't deny them. They said it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. From a theological point of view, from a faith point of view, it doesn't matter. From a biblical point of view, from a scholarly point of view, it doesn't matter. It's just like the question of, is Abraham the descendant, the antecedent of the Arabs through Ishmael? No, how could he be? He was an Egyptian. So, I mean, these texts say things to establish things which may not be true. It doesn't matter. I mean, what are you going to do, wipe out all the Arabs because there's a mistake there? No, you accept who there is. But from an objective point of view, you have to check out the text. Right? The Hebrew Scriptures make allegations and assertions which may not be true either. So you study and you find out.
For example?
The first 11 chapters of Genesis make certain assertions about the age of people and where they lived and who they were, and they were all mythological.
So you're saying
history starts with Abram, right? And it doesn't matter. For our purposes, it doesn't matter. From a theological point of view, it doesn't matter. From a historical point of view, it does matter. Was there an ark? How big were the animals? How big was the ark? That matters if you're interested in history. If you're only interested in ideas and theology, which are not related necessarily to any objective information, you could say whatever you want.
I think probably the creation, you hear a lot about creation, especially on the radio and TV shows and the Christians, and I think the argument has to go all the way back to the idea of original sin, the idea that if Jesus was the Messiah, then he was he broke the bond of original sin. So
we ask the question, what is original sin? We want to know what is the original sin. Jews don't believe in original sin. So we want to know what is the original sin that he was required to come to
I wouldn't actually say the Baha'is believe in original sin either. It's just an interesting concept to discuss.
There are many ideas floating around on television programs that Jews don't accept. For example, the business about the devil is on every television program, and we say there is no devil. Right? We say there's no original sin. We say there's God and there's man. And man deals with God, and God deals with man, and man can get himself into enough trouble without a devil. Right? We don't need any devils to get us into trouble.
That's pretty much what Baha'is say, too. There is no devil, but there is evil in the world. But
that's true. God, there's plenty of evil. There's no there's lots of evil. The question is, why is there evil? And from a psychoanalytical point of view, it seems to me the devil is simply an erotic response. I'll blame it on somebody else. I never caused trouble. Somebody else caused me trouble. This is very dangerous. So, in the study of Hebrew Scriptures, which ostensibly yields all these ideas, we don't find these things. You have to study it in
Do the
Hebrew
Hebrew
because you don't
scriptures
see it in
actually
Hebrew.
say the word devil?
No, there is no
devil?
term for devil. There's the term Satan, the adversary.
Uh-huh.
It's like a prosecutor. In the book of Job, we have the Satan, who is the adversary, who says to God, listen, this guy's no good, and they go in and get involved in that discussion. But there's no independent power.
Uh-huh.
That's blasphemous. God has all the power. How can there be an independent power to challenge God? See?
One
we
analogy
deny that.
One analogy that I've heard is that you have the sun rising, which gives light to the world. And this would be kind of like God giving light to the world. The idea of a Satan, there is no orb that rises and radiates darkness to the earth.
Okay, but that's very bad, because the idea of the sun rising is of a flat world and it goes down and comes back underneath.
Well,
God doesn't disappear and come back. He's always there. His radiance is always there. His light is always there. We just don't see it sometimes. But that analogy is very dangerous because it says that God isn't always around. That's also blasphemous. God is always there, whether
the sun
we're...
is always there, even if it's dark outside.
That's right, so people say, if there was no sun, we would disappear in a couple of seconds, freeze to death.
I think the point I was trying to make, though, is that there is not an opposite to the sun that rises and radiates darkness to cause light. And the same thing is true of God and Satan, that there doesn't necessarily have to be an embodiment of evil.
This is your Persian background. See, the God of light and darkness. See?
So what I'm saying is that this is not true.
No, it isn't true. We've been fighting about that with everybody since Abraham, that there's only one.
Okay, so
there's only one God.
We're in total agreement then.
Okay, that's right. Okay. If you don't like the way the world is, don't blame it on the devil. It's God made the world this way. If you don't like it, you argue with God.
Right.
Right? And that's what the book of Job and other sections are about. You want to argue with God, argue with God. Don't bring in a third party. We don't need a third. Like bring in your mother-in-law when you argue with your wife. Who is your mother-in-law? You deal with your wife directly. By the way, that is very dangerous to bring in a third party. The police are always being mauled by husbands and wives who are fighting. So you want to deal with God, you have to deal with God. We say you must deal with God, whether you like him or not. You must deal with God. There's no way out of it. And you just better adjust yourself to this God. Other people have brought in the mountain gods and the gods of the trees and the gods of the earth. That's why the Hebrew scriptures say when God began to create the heavens and the earth, right? He made everything, right? This is our life for 4,000 years. People still argue about, people are not sure about. That's what we stand for, the absolute sovereignty of God, which of course Muslims agree with and most Christians agree with. God has all the power. He doesn't share it with anybody. He doesn't need to share it. Why should he share it? He gives us a little chance to run around his world and do things, but we don't have the power of God. Sometimes we think we do. Then we get Adolf Hitlers and Stalins and that kind of person. It's dangerous to think that you can be God. So the book of Ecclesiastes is there to say, hey, you're going to die. Everything dies.
I think it's getting pretty close to the time that this show is going to die.
Don't you believe in resurrection?
We have...
come back next week.
We have about 45 seconds.
Thank you for
want to come back next week?
Whenever you're ready.
Let's do it again.
Okay.
Next week, we're going to talk about resurrection.
Okay.
And see if we come back.
Uplifting.
You're going to have to come back the week after and see if we, in fact, were resurrected. So we're just about out of time. This is Baha'i Focus, and we're talking today with Rabbi Leonard Zoll. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the program. Baha'i Focus, as I mentioned earlier, is a local production. It's produced here in Carbondale. We're on twice a week. We're on Tuesdays at 5 o'clock and Sundays at 8 in the morning. Well, the Rabbi, you didn't mention that you have a radio show?
Oh, yes, WGGH,
okay.
11:50 a.m. Marion, Sundays 2 p.m. to 2:30.
Every Sunday?
Every Sunday.
Watch it on Sunday.
Listen to it on Sunday.
Okay.
Radio.
Baha'i Focus this week. Thank you for watching.